Good morning, people. American cinema people. I hope this finds you well. I hope everything's going well for you and none of your people are infected or doing poorly. Okay, so what I've done here is I'm going to talk to you for a little bit on this video. I have a list of notes here that I will send along to you. And the idea is, after I finish my announcements, there are some links on this sheet of notes that I would ask you to um, take a look at. So I'll be talking a little bit just to put them in context, and then you can pause this video as necessary, go watch the link, come back, and we'll see how that works. It's a little bit primitive, but these are odd times. All right, so anyway, this week's plan is to catch up, really, because you had a lot before the break. We had talked about all the Cook reading you had been assigned, and you had, with the exam review, you had a list of topics in the Cook that you should have read about by then, and so I need to know if those were not accessible to you somehow. But otherwise, you can take a look at that list and say, yeah, okay, I read about that, got it, think I understand what's going on there. You can of course, send questions. But in any case, those are the topics that are necessary from that reading. So please communicate with me if any of them are obscure or were difficult to understand. You were also asked the week before the break, to see Birth of a Nation. So the Birth of a Nation, not the thing from a couple years ago, but D.W. Griffith's film from 1918. I will talk a little bit about that, and I'll talk about some more stuff on Thursday. So since this is kind of a lecture class, we're going to do this a couple times a week. If you haven't done those things, do them this week, please. Have them done by this week so that when I talk to you a little bit about Birth of a Nation on Thursday, it will make sense. For now, what I would like to do is ask you to take a look at some of these clips related to some of the topics in your reading. And this is actually kind of cool because some of these clips I have not used in class before, but I think they're very good at illustrating some of these concepts. So the first one I would like you to take a look at is a clip on persistence of vision. There on the notes you'll get, it says optical phenomena, and then it says persistence of vision. Persistence of vision. This, by the way, this little film is kind of hilarious. I don't know if it's a legitimately 1950s kind of school hygiene film, is what it looks like, but or whether it was done in that style more recently. But it's really funny. Anyway, persistence of vision relates to the phenomenon that when you introduce a stimulus to people's eyes, the image implants on their retina, and when the image is removed, when the stimulus is removed, the light goes out. The image doesn't fade instantaneously. It does stick around for a fraction of a second. And if you replace it in that fraction of a second with another light stimulus, another light image, then the human eye will not perceive there having been any darkness. So when you're watching a projected film, you are watching picture dark, picture dark, picture dark, back and forth, and but you don't notice that because the picture changes quickly enough excuse me, nothing makes me want to scratch my nose like the whole world saying don't touch your face. Anyway. You don't notice the dark. You don't notice the darkness because it's called flicker fusion. You go fast enough to a point where you go picture dark, picture dark, picture dark, and all you see is the pictures. So persistence of vision is one of the quirks of the human optical system that allow motion pictures to create the illusion they do. And there's a very clever little film on it that you can watch there. Phi phenomenon is another one of these. The phi phenomenon refers to what's called apparent motion, and what that means is when you see a sequential action. For instance, if I were to, touch my head here, and then you would see another image of me doing this, and then you would see another image of me doing this, you would assume that at one point I had done this. Okay, even though you never saw that whole action put together. And that is called apparent motion, or the phi phenomenon. Um, and That's another, again, it's another quirk of human cognition that allows motion pictures to create the illusion they do, because you're not, even though I show you this, this, and this, you never actually see me do this, but your mind fills in the blanks and you assume that I do. The next clip that I have for you is some of the first films that were produced by Edison and the Lumieres in France. Edison in the United States, Lumieres in France. These are essentially curiosities, because that's what motion pictures were at the time. They were kind of a novelty. This is called the novelty period, as a matter of fact, in motion picture development. The Edison films, Strong Man Flexing and The Kiss, which was a Broadway phenomenon at the time, they're all just little things for people to go, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. All right, and that's where the medium was until narrative took over and sort of dragged it forward and made it into what it is today. But in any case, the Edison films are very simple, very short, as are the Lumiere's films. The Lumiere's films are notedly kind of realistic in a sense. They really just document everyday life. In fact, they were called actualities, sort of a precursor to the documentary. And there's a number of each of those there for you to take a look at and get a sense of the fact that, frankly, at the beginning, people were just amused with seeing pictures projected on a wall. So even earlier on, seeing big pictures projected in a single person viewer, in Edison's case, the kinetoscope. So those things are there for you to take a look at, and they're somewhat amusing in their own right. And then we get to a different area. These are the last clips I have for you today that I would like you to take a look at. And these clips refer to the arc of the medium towards narrative. One of the first things you have is a trip to the moon. You read about a trip to the moon in your text. Georges Méliès, amateur musician, theatrical producer, is using his camera one day, and it gets jammed, and he notices when he rolls the film back that one kind of vehicle transforms into another kind of vehicle as if by magic. And since he was a magician and was interested in the fantastic, this was right up his alley, and so he became a very avid user of motion pictures to create his shows and his sort of fantasias. A Trip to the Moon is an interesting film in a narrative sense, in the sense that it is a film that differentiates between a film and a shot. Okay, so in the beginning, films were one shot and they were one scene, and all of these things were co-equal. One shot equals one scene equals one film. Trip to the Moon separates the story into different scenes. Okay, not necessarily, doesn't really chop it up into different shots within the scenes, but you do have about 10 scenes, and those all put together tell the story. We'll differentiate down into shots in a few minutes here. But in any case, Trip to the Moon, very interesting film. It shows up in a Smashing Pumpkins video 80 some odd years later. But anyway, interesting film, and it shows you a sense of how somebody who is really interested in creating something wildly creative could make use of the medium, and specifically the plasticity of the medium, the ways in which it is artificial, very early on. So that represents a kind of a split that you should know about early on in film history, and that is that the Lumieres go in a realistic direction with their work, and Méliès goes in a fantastic direction with his work. So he's interested in creating things that are frankly impossible, and they're interested in showing real life. And so that's kind of a fork in the road for the early development of cinema. The next clip is The Great Train Robbery, and this is an interesting film from Edwin S. Porter. And it has introduces a number of narrative innovations that you should be familiar with. It shoots exteriors, which is something you're not familiar with so far from the Edison, the Lumiere, and A Trip to the Moon. It makes use of exteriors. It also cuts away from scenes before they come to a conclusion, with the assumption that the audience will realize that lots of things are going on and eventually all will be made clear. So it sort of drags the audience into kind of a narrative understanding in that way. You have to watch the film and assume that you will you'll come back to certain scenes that are not really concluded. And that's indeed what happens. So that's another thing. It makes use of a matte shot. I think matte shots are explained in your text. If they are not, I will provide you. I'll put a link on these notes to matte shots, and that is the technology, very early, simple to film technology used to create the illusion of the open train cars flying past the forest in the beginning of the film. It on occasion asks you to look at more than one thing in the frame at once. So most films, even today, ask you only to pay attention to what's in the center of the frame. But Great Train Robbery will occasionally have action in the center of the frame, and then you'll have people coming in from the side of the frame, and that is still a very unusual thing today, because most pictures are made to be very easy to understand, and Great Train Robbery was a little bit of a challenge to people. And also violence. There's a scene in the film where somebody gets shot and they just lay there dead, apparently. And that is again something that even today you don't very typically see, because somebody gets shot and the scene just goes on. That is something that one picks these things up by kind of lore and hearsay, because the Motion Picture Ratings Association doesn't really want to talk about its criteria for what makes a film acceptable or unacceptable. One of the things they really don't like is somebody shooting a gun and somebody being shot in the same frame. I don't know why. That's necessarily sort of dulls the edge on the violence, but that is something that I have read many times that they specifically do not like. But in this case, this is 1903, and it happens, and that's it's just part of the film. So anyway, a number of interesting innovations in Great Train Robbery, specifically, getting out of scenes and coming back to them, and the audience maybe for a second going, what's going on? And then, again, they'll come back to it, they'll explain it in a narrative sense. Let's see what else. Hold on a second. Nope. Yeah, okay. Let's see what else. The last clip is a clip called Rescued by Rover, which is actually an English production. And this is a significant clip because it establishes something that we depend on these days, and that's called creative geography. Creative geography refers to the creation of understandable screen space in the absence of a master shot, which is to say a shot that shows you everything that you need to see to know where everything is in a production. What Rescued by Rover does is it puts together an understandable path from